So here's an example of how I would go about conducting an instructional analysis on a goal and having that analysis result in the creation of instructional objectives that I will be developing my instructional program over. So this example begins with a topic that is sort of in the same vein of the types of topics that you first dealt with in the course. So my topic is that I want some learners to appreciate the value of teamwork. And so the first thing I need to do is figure out what a good goal would be for that, what an adequate one would be. And appreciating the value of teamwork could certainly mean a lot of things. I could ask, my goal could be that learners will rate the teamwork as a value high on a scale of important characteristics of being a good student or being a good employee. So my goal could be something like that the learners will increase their how they respond to survey items on the value of teamwork, or something like that. That is not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in my learners actually learning how to or I should say working well in teams. It would be the goal of my instruction. So I would take the topic of appreciating the value of teamwork and I would translate it into a goal for an instructional experience that the learners will work constructively within a group. So that's how I am realizing appreciating the value of it. Because the way I see it, if learners appreciate the value, then they're going to choose to adopt behaviors that reflect that value. So my goal then is going to be to help learners be able to learn how to work constructively within a group. Now I'm simplifying this whole process for the sake of this example, and it's a little more complicated in real life, and I would change things around a little bit if my target population were kindergartners versus computer programmers working on teams at a web app development company. So, although, frankly, if you think about it, the difference between those two groups is probably not that great, but I digress. So I have this goal, work constructively within a group, and I'm going to just quickly analyze the goal to determine the goal steps. And after thinking about it, I determined three goal steps, and certainly there would be more, but again, I'm simplifying things for the sake of this example. So being able to communicate well in the group, that's a goal step. Being able to support each other in the group, that's another goal step. And then being able to successfully complete their assigned roles or tasks. To me, those are three very important broad things that the learners should be able to do in order to accomplish the goal of being able to work constructively in a group. Now, as soon as I start breaking things down like this, I like to organize them in a flowchart so that I can begin to think about the relationship between the different pieces of what I want learners to be able to learn how to do. So here's an initial flowchart where I have my goal at the top, and then I have my three goal steps. And the way the arrows are right now, they sort of imply that each of those three goal steps are sort of separate from each other. But in reality, if you think about it, I think that communicating well is subordinate to supporting others. So in other words, I don't think you can support others in your group without being able to communicate well. So I rearrange my arrow just to communicate the fact that in this case, if I'm helping my learners acquire the skills needed to be able to work constructively within a group, I would focus on communication skills before the other skills, because again, I think that communication skills are necessary if you're going to be supporting others in the group. It might also be necessary to successfully complete assigned roles if those roles involve communication in some way, which they likely do. So I might even rearrange this further. Now, another thing that I talk about in the course notes is the fact that when you look at this flowchart right now, it's sort of hard just by looking at the flowchart to differentiate between the goal and the goal steps just visually, other than the fact that the goal is at the top. So I like to use a convention in my own design practice where I will usually take a goal and I will change the lines on the box in my flowchart to depict a particular level of development. So here I put double lines around the goal statement, and then I used thick lines around the goal steps. You don't have to use lines. Some people like to use colors in their boxes. The book, the flowcharting examples in the course text, they sort of focus on pretty much the same shape of boxes, except they'll change the shape somewhat if you come to a decision tree or something. They use classic flowcharting. I don't think you need to be that specific. Just use some convention for yourself so that when you look at your flowchart, you can easily differentiate between these different levels. Now, another thing I like to do is begin keeping track of my goal steps and the outcomes that are going to be contributing to each of the goal steps. I like to organize them by numbering them. So my goal steps, I'll give them a whole number, 1, 2, 3. So there you go, and I've numbered them here. And I suppose they're sort of numbered in the order in which I would want to have my learners learn skills associated with them. So I am then now going to focus on now that I have my goal steps, I need to analyze each of my goal steps to determine what skills I think learners need to learn within each of those steps. And I'm going to focus just on number 1, communicate well. And so what I did, I took communicate well. You'll notice it's up there at the top of the page. I just ripped it away from the whole flowchart. There's an arrow pointing off of it indicating that it's connected to number 2. Which isn't on display. So then I just sort of analyzed communicating well, and again, for the sake of simplifying my analysis here, I just pulled out 4 skills that would constitute communicating well. And these skills were derived from conducting sort of a task analysis on what does it mean, what does it look like to communicate well, what is somebody doing who is communicating well. And so I have these four sub-skills: listening attentively, speaking clearly, asking questions about things that are unclear, and then responding to questions that are asked. And there certainly could be more. And again, you might think that that a subordinate skill like responding to questions asked is pretty, it's not something that people have to learn if they're grown-ups. But believe me, it is something that you have to learn if your target population are younger. Even high schoolers have to learn that is something that constitutes normal human behavior when you're working in a group. So I just pulled these out, and they're not in any particular order or arrangement right now because I just wanted to get them out. And again, because they're subordinate to communicating well, the goal step number 1, I made the lines around the boxes a little bit thinner. I guess I probably could have made them even thinner than this, but that's where we're at for now. So the next step, once I know what my sub skills are going to be, now I need to sort of arrange them in the order that makes the best sense in terms of having learners learn them. And one thing I thought about was that listening attentively is certainly subordinate to responding to questions asked, because proper response to questions asked is depends on you knowing what the question is, and knowing what the question is involves listening attentively. So I dragged that one underneath responds to questions asked, and I drew an arrow pointing from it into that one. And then, of course, nothing else is subordinate to that, so I drew a line from there to communicating well. Now, when I was thinking about the other skills, I thought, well, speaking clearly and directly to others is a skill. It will be applied within asking questions about things that are unclear. You want questions to be asked to be communicated clearly. So I thought, well, that's definitely a skill that I would need to make sure they learn and are good at before asking questions. It became part of what they needed to learn how to do. And then I thought about it further, and I thought, well, speaking clearly and directly to others is also in play when you're responding to questions asked. So I drew a line there into that one. Now I did this, and it started to get a little bit confusing. So I wanted to rearrange my boxes a little bit more related to my goal step, communicate well. So I just moved things around a little bit, and I have everything connected to communicating well. So this is the relationship between these things to be learned and each other with regard to the overall goal step of communicating well. And then I started looking at each of these skills, and I thought, well, okay, well, what is subordinate to these? And this is where your analysis you could start to go a little too analytical here. You could probably come up with 3 or 4 sub skills for each of these boxes. But I wanted to just pull one out specifically to talk about, and that is the fact that one thing you would need to do in order to listen attentively is maintain good eye contact. That's part of listening attentively. Not always, of course. If you're listening to something in headphones or you don't necessarily need to have good eye contact, but when you're communicating with somebody interpersonally, it is better technique to have eye contact when somebody's talking to you, at least in some capacity. And you'll notice, though, that I put a dotted line around good eye contact because I decided when I was looking at this analysis that eye contact was something I was just going to assume my learners could do well. I will include eye contact in the instruction for listening attentively, but I won't teach them how to do good eye contact in this program. It depends on the audience, obviously, but I just wanted to point out that some things become prerequisite knowledge after you analyze everything, and then you pick the ones that you know you're not going to prepare formal instruction over, and you're just going to make the assumption that the learners can perform, are capable of performing that without information, examples, practice, and feedback. But again, it depends on the audience there. So now I'm going to decide that I'm done analyzing my goal step number 1, communicate well, and I feel really good about the sub-skills and about the order in which I think that they should be learned. And so then I'm going to go ahead and continue my numbering convention. And so the skills that are directly subordinate to communicate well, I numbered, because communicate well is goal step number 1, I numbered my subordinate skills for this 1.1 and 1.2. And then, for example, because listening attentively is subordinate to respond to questions asked, which is I numbered 1.2, then I'm going to number listen attentively as 1.2.1. And you don't necessarily need to do this. I like to do it because even for small design projects, I usually end up with 20 objectives, and in order for me to mentally keep track of them and to keep track of the relationship between them when I'm designing, I like to just associate numbers with them. So you don't have to do this, but I recommend it. So I've done that, and now, so once you do this for all of your goal steps, then you can go about taking all of the skills that you identified and writing instructional objectives for them based on what the parameters of your learning environment. So let me just provide you with a short example before we end this analysis here. So I'm going to focus on listening attentively. That is a skill set, that's a skill, and it's something that I'm going to help my learners learn how to do in this program that I'm creating. So listening attentively. So listen attentively. The performance outcome for listen attentively is listen attentively. That's the skill I want them to learn how to do. And because I'm imagining that I'm going to be teaching this, let's say, to a group of of young professionals in a face-to-face setting. It doesn't have to be, but I'm doing that. Then I'm going to create an instructional objective that includes some of the conditions under which they're going to be learning and practicing this skill, as well as a standard by which I'm going to evaluate whether or not they did it well. So this results in an instructional objective of, while interacting in a group setting, the learners will listen attentively by maintaining eye contact, acknowledging agreement or not using subtle head movement, and verbally validating what the speaker is communicating. So that then becomes the actual objective I'm going to help my learners learn how to do within my program, and this is how they're going to be measured as to whether or not they did, in fact, listen attentively. And that's it. Easy as that.